This is part 2 of transforming your watercolors with brush pens and dip pens. In the first part, a couple of weeks ago, which was my last video, I talked a lot about how to do details in general. And I talked mostly about the brush pen with a demonstration of the brush pen. But I had a lot of questions about how to actually use a dip pen. So in part 2, we are going to address just dip pens. I'm going to try not to repeat a lot of the information that I gave you about dip pens in the other video. So if you want to know about these particular dip pens, I have links in the description below, and you can go back and watch that other video where I give you some information. But I am going to try not to repeat myself just for your sake. I am in no way an expert on dip pens. I've just used them for adding the details to my watercolors and to do some light calligraphy, which again, I am not an expert at. So I'll just tell you what I know about this. The most important thing, I think, is don't forget to clean it. After you're finished with it, you'll want to remove the nib, just pull it straight out and wash it. Make sure you get all your ink off so that it doesn't get dried ink inside these little crevices and cause you problems later on. Then you'll want to dry it completely. These are metal, so they are going to rust. Now, a little bit of rusting is kind of hard to prevent just because pigment and water will get down in there. But if you remove it, wash it, dry it, really well, and then let it completely air dry for, a couple of hours before you put it back in your handle, because water gets down in your handle as well, so there can be moisture stored in there. So I would just let everything dry out for over several hours before you put it back in to help prevent the rusting. Now, I have two that I really like, and they're good for different things. Like I did mention in the other video, this very small one is really good for fine lines, and this one is really good for a mixture of things. So before I give you a demonstration on that, let's talk about the inks. Liquitex is probably my favorite. It's a little bit thicker, and it comes with this really nice dropper. So if I'm going to paint with my inks, since these are so concentrated, I would put a little bit in a dish or a little, jar or something and add water to it to thin it out a little bit. I think they work better that way if you're actually painting with them. But for doing line detail, I just leave them at 100%. The other good one is Ecoline. Now when I'm going to paint, I use Ecoline quite a bit. It's more thin, so if I'm going to use details with Ecoline, I use this very small nib. Same thing with Winsor & Newton is really good. They're one of my top favorites, I would say, for doing detail work. It's thin and liquidy, but not super thin. I can use it with this nib. I just tend to have a little bit more blobbing occur with the Winsor & Newton and this particular nib, the Blue Pumpkin. But you try them out, see which combinations you like, which inks with which nibs. I am going to show you what this looks like. You just want to dip it up to, right about here. To get this whole nib covered. Try not to dip it way up here, which can sometimes happen when you're getting low on ink and you have to really dip inside. You can kind of get some up here. And this is messy, it's going to get on your hands. That's just how it is. So if I just, lightly go across, I can get some pretty thin lines, and then if I press just a little bit more ink will come out and the line will be a little thicker. probably need to reload. And then when you press down hard, you will get a lot of ink at once. Now see how when I press down, there's a split up the middle. And so it causes that to open, and that's what releases all that pigment. But you see, it released a lot at once. So when you're drawing with this, you can do light and then go thicker and light again. And you'll just learn when you want to do thicker and thinner. And then blobs are going to happen. There's no way around that. Now let me just rinse that real quick, and I will show you let's change over to something that's a little more liquidy. And I did not get that top on right. With this really small nib, look how small that is. And that really comes in handy if you're doing a flower and you want some very fine lines. A lot of times I'll switch over to this one. And I'll do the outlines in the larger one and then fine details with this smaller one. And another thing that you might want to keep in mind, it's easier to use a dip pen when you're drawing with it anyway, if you are pulling rather than pushing. If you were going to push, it's going to catch quite a bit on your paper. So pull it towards you or pull it that way. You know, that way for me, since I'm right-handed, doesn't go as well. So I always go from left to right or down. So that's just a little tip, but just play with it. And see, this kind of thing happens all the time. They are very messy. So put something down that you don't mind getting ink all over. And you may want to protect your tabletop if you're afraid of staining, because these will stain. Okay, so just to show you this in action, I am going to use this purple with my blue pumpkin. And just going to add a few little details to this. And you do have to dip quite often. A lot of times I will actually use my watercolors rather than the inks, just because the colors match better. But this particular purple does pretty well. And I will show you, because that does require, rather than just dipping, you can mix your watercolor up and put it in a small container. Like sometimes when I have little empty ones of this, I will save them, and then when I need to mix up some watercolors with a little water to use with my dip pen, then I have something to dip into. But I don't really have one of those at the moment. But when I don't, I'll show you what I do. Let me just finish this. I want to add some little veins here. Let's just continue around a little bit, and I will take some of that Indian black in a minute and do some little center work. Okay, I think that's all I want to do for now for that. But let me rinse this off. And I don't really take the nib out and wash the whole thing unless I'm completely finished with my project. So I just dip it in some water, wipe it off with a paper towel. But when you're going to use watercolor, you are going to want to mix up whatever colors you're going to use and get it a good consistency. I like it a little bit on the thick side. All right. And then over a plate or a scrap piece of paper, not over your artwork. You want to just brush inside the back side of that nib to deposit your paint inside the nib. And then you might want to tap it just to see, do you have too much? And I think we need a little more. And you can mix the colors even. All right, so now, see, I did not dab it over, over the plate or the scrap. So we have a blob there. That's all right. I'm just going to work with it. So you see, that happens very easily. That's why you always want to use a scrap piece of paper and not your artwork or over your palette like I'm doing now. And then I'm just going to tap it. Okay, we're good. That actually looks good. I like it. And you can always add a little more water if your paint starts getting a little thick. Just add a little more water. Just add as much as you want. All right, and another good thing, if let's say you've painted something and your paint has dried and oh, you decided, I wish I had put veins on my leaves. Instead of doing it with a paintbrush, you can just grab your dip pen. And add some details with your dip pen. Super fast. Now let's do a little black in the center of that flower. All right, so I will use this. And you want to be careful not to put your hand down because you will smear this. It takes a long time for ink to dry. In fact, I usually let it sit overnight. So just be very careful not to touch it. So I want a lot of this ink so that it will show up. But don't completely cover up the white because then it loses the impact. So I think that's enough. Okay. So let me show you how to clean it. So you'll want to be careful when handling your nibs because they are very pointed and they do hurt. So I'm just going to dip this in some clean water. And then I'm going to grab it with my paper towel and pull it. Then I'm going to dip this in. And this handle is made of wood, so I'm trying not to get a lot up here. But I do want to clean that part off. And now I'm just going to wipe this off. Make sure that it's very dry. Okay. That's nice and clean, so I'll just lay those two out to dry. Well, I hope that answered your questions about how to use a dip pen for adding details to your watercolors. If not, just pop your questions below and I'll get right back to you. Thanks for joining me today, and I hope to see you soon.